I don't have any words for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it did not take place in time. No time passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not in the spatial world anymore. But the only way I can describe this is I got out of my body. I went through a tunnel. I met my deceased relatives. I saw my life pass in review. I returned to my body and I came back to life.
I'm Pastor Brett Watson. I'm one of the teaching pastors here at Suncoast Community Church, and I have with me my good friend, Dr. Raymond Moody.
Thank y'all all for watching that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brett, for having me.
So we've had a lot of fun in recent times wrapping up your book that you've been writing, organizing it and all that. And we've had one discussion about that, probably 9 months ago.
Yeah.
And we left that discussion with a challenge from you. And that was to read specifically, I remember chapter 6 and a few other chapters that you said were important for context for that chapter. And I think I'm the only one that actually ended up reading.
I can understand that, man.
So it's a lot. So it's not this book is more of an academic work, I think.
Yeah, in the general sense that the purpose of academe, which was formed by when Plato went down to register academe as an organization at the city hall, the purpose of the organization was to worship the muses.
No kidding.
And I'm right on with that.
Yeah. Gosh, so you are the king of interesting Greek philosophy stories.
Oh my God, it's the most fascinating story of history and the most underappreciated story of history. But people who get into it, it's like in 280 years, from about say 580, 590, somewhere there, to the death of Aristotle, 280 years later. They went from having an alphabet, but no concept of truth or falsehood, no distinction between literal and figurative, very little knowledge. And 280 years later, they had all of those things.
Yeah.
The logic that we still use, distinction between truth and falsehood, literal and figurative, and they had the theory of evolution and the atomic theory of matter. And you can't understand how that happened unless you realize that these people, the founders of Western thought, one of their main activities was to go to these places called oracles of the dead and call up spirits of the deceased.
Nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah, well, it's embarrassing even for modern philosophers. Although they have they're a looser group than when I got my PhD in philosophy. Yeah. And now a lot of them, there is a wonderful classical scholar named Daniel Ogden. And he's published a book through the Princeton University Press on the Greek and Roman oracles of the dead, and it tells that whole story. But it's just fascinating, and you know the way the whole distinction between the mind and the body got started was that in about 600 there was this guy named Hermotimus. And his talent, which was known all over Greece, was he had the talent of leaving his body at will and going to distant locations and retrieving knowledge. And this so impressed these early philosophers that they said, hey, there's two things. There's the body, and then there's this mind or soul component.
Yeah.
And so, you can't understand the history of how we got to be the way we are with the rational creatures we're supposed to be unless you understand that these guys were interested in near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and calling up the dead. And, it's a fascinating story.
It really is. And I've learned probably more from you in the last few years than I did from reading any of the stuff. I mean, it's you've got it all jam-packed into that brain of yours, and I really appreciate the stories. So, and the truth is that, in particular, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle had a huge influence on Christian theology.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, didn't the early church fathers, they didn't have much to go on about the afterlife in the Jewish or Christian scriptures.
No.
So they adopted Plato's Phaedo as the Christian theology of
really
the
did.
afterlife. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the whole thing about the immortal soul and stuff comes from.
All right. So this book, Swan Song, claims to provide, is that the right word? To provide a logical proof for the afterlife.
A way forward through it's you have to follow a case. You have to follow the history and the reasoning and the conceptual reasoning. But where it ends up to is that, yes, it now is possible, perfectly possible, to create a genuinely rigorous, rational proof of an afterlife. And it has already partially succeeded. I have had one positive return that I know of from this experiment. But one thing that this is going to involve is that, how people think about the paranormal, really, in our society. There's three sects. And the three sects are the parapsychologist and the psychical researchers. Okay, and what they say is that this is a scientific question that they can solve by studying mediums and such, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the second group, which is called the skeptics. And these are the most annoying to me, not because of anything to do with near-death experiences, because I love to teach philosophy. And those people are just ignoramuses, and mostly of a kind of adolescent mindset. And they say, "Oh, I'm a skeptic." See, I think these near-death experiences, they're just the illusion in the mind, just the biological activity in the mind. Well, let me tell you what skeptic means. Okay, the skeptical movement was formed by Pyrrho, who was a Hellenistic philosopher. This was after after Alexander.
His conquest, yeah.
And
Pyrrho accompanied him, didn't he?
Yeah, Pyrrho, and Pyrrho is the name. And he was a skeptic, and he came after Aristotle. And his thinking was, well, now we know a way to think, logic. He understood logic very well. And he said, if you think about it, logic is a machine for generating conclusions for premises. And he said, well, what if we don't draw the conclusion? He said, let's imagine that we follow every line, we ask every question, we really think it through as far as we can. But in the end, we refrain from drawing a conclusion. That's what the word means.
That's what genuine skepticism is. Yeah.
And they did this for two reasons. It was a spiritual experience, because if you really do that all the time, it really does a great thing to your mind. But secondly, if everybody else is rushing in this direction to get to the conclusion, but your technique is to look away, then you're going to see things along the side pathways that everybody else missed. Now, knowing that, by the way, Pyrrho was one of the Greek philosophers that went to India with Alexander the Great. And when he was over there, he consorted with the early Buddhists.
Yes.
And he came back a Buddhist.
He did. I don't know how you deny that. I read that book that you gave me.
Yeah. And he perambulated, walked by, and he meditated. And so these morons who call themselves skeptics, they don't know that. They don't know. Well, anyway, now feedback, knowing that, feedback what they say. All right. I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the mind.
They're drawing the conclusion.
To unpack that, what they're saying is, I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is that it's a self-contradiction.
Yeah.
These people they have an adolescent mindset, and they're just annoying as hell. But then the worst group of all to me is the demonologist. That it's all a matter of demons, and the medium is a getting in touch with demonic spirits,
right.
and I have different criticism of the mediums. You don't have to think of it as demons. All you have to think about it is, if you knew a few figures of speech, you'd realize that's just a sham. But they're sincere people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like that. Those three sects are really the same sect. They all depend on thinking that the words like "there is a life after death" are literally meaningful words. But actually, all of the common language terms that refer to life after death are figures of speech. But none of the parapsychologists or psychical researchers, I've tried to tell them that just goes over their head. Because, they're affixed to a social movement called scientism.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and scientism has nothing to do with science. It's a social movement of do-gooders, who think that we're going to use the scientific method to fix the whole world.
And they've elevated the scientific method to a status that says that there is no other way
That's right.
to attain knowledge except
right.
by the scientific method. And that's simply not true.
It's simply not true.
Yeah.
And it's self-contradictory, too. Because if you say, I used to teach epistemology, and so I asked the students, what do you think knowledge is? They'd come up with this, like scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd write that on the board, and I'd say, is that what you think? They'd say, yeah. So I'd draw a rectangle about it, and I'd point to it, how do you know that? All right, now there's two
right.
answers they can give.
Yeah.
Scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge, and I know that by scientific method. That's reasoning in a circle, the logical fallacy called petitio principii. The other option they could have is scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge, and I know that by philosophy or history or the law or literary theory. And that's a self-contradiction. So these people are just do-gooders who, with this crazy optimism. And it's mostly because they've never studied the humanities. They went right in college, they went right into their physics classes. They don't know that there's a whole world of knowledge out there that's quite independent of science. And I myself am a great lover of science. I started out.
How could you not love science?
I started out as an astronomer. That's how I got it in. So anyway, this is not against science. This is against that ridiculous social movement.
I think it's good to clarify that, but at the same time, you're not talking about science there. You're talking about scientism.
Yeah.
Which is nothing more than a kind of religious stand.
Yeah, it is. It's a religion. It's espoused by a group called the Humanists,
mm-hmm.
and it's the same group that publishes the so-called Skeptical Inquirer. They have the Humanist Science Society has another publication on the newsstand in addition to their Skeptical Inquirer, so it's the same group. And the way that came about is that humanists are generally, what happened is that they were turned off by religion. Right, mm-hmm. as kids, often because
understandable,
right? Maybe being terrified about hell or all
mm-hmm.
the different things, and so they gave up religion. But then they found, I really enjoy that socializing. So they formed and also they needed rituals, right? Like weddings and funerals. So that's what the humanists are all about. And it's just a different religion. They got imbued with the religious spirit, and now it's humanism.
Yeah.
And it's nonsense is what it is. And some of them are really nice guys. I mean,
Oh yeah, and they do good things.
yeah.
You know.
And the good advantages of those skeptical magazines, there's two of them. One is the Skeptical Inquirer. The other, published by Michael Shermer, who's this really terrific guy in California. And they do a service for the public in exposing fraud.
Yeah.
So they're good guys, but they're just off base on their thinking because they're.
I think so.
I think so.
Michael Shermer, I don't know him personally. I think you've probably met him. But
I haven't met him personally. I talked to him. I like Michael.
yeah, I'm sure he is a nice guy. But
Caustic, but you know.
yes, yeah, I guess that's what it is. In any case, I want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of the process, like because it made me think of something that Pastor Troy, Dr. Troy Doucet, says about the Greek word aletheia.
Aletheia, truth, or more or
Yeah.
less.
So
But
he
with
often
a
refers to
holy
it as
significance.
truthing,
Truthing.
the ongoing discovery. So this kind of falls into where the true skeptic is.
Yes,
This kind of
that's right.
plays into that.
That's right.
And so there's this ongoing discovery of
That's right.
reality.
That's right.
And the upside of never drawing a conclusion is, well, you said part of it, that it expands the consciousness that
Yeah, that's right.
is endeavoring to keep discovering, keep
That's
truthing.
right. That's right. It
And,
means that the word in Sextus Empiricus is a Hellenistic book. It was a manual of how to be a skeptic. And in the very beginning, he says there are three schools of thought. He said there's the academic, that was Plato. And their theory is that knowledge is impossible, right? Yeah. And Plato said, wisdom is knowing that you don't know. Right, that
Yeah.
was Socrates. So he said the academics is that there's knowledge isn't possible. Then there are the dogmatists, and that doesn't mean what we mean by it today. It just meant like a crystallized opinion, and that was Aristotle. Aristotle is a great guy, but he's always, this logic I created, this is so great. He was a very enthusiastic guy, and he was just so proud of his knowledge. But he thought that I've got the answer here, right?
Yeah.
And he said, and then there are the skeptics, and we go on inquiring. That's what skeptical inquiry is.
Yeah.
To continue your inquiry.
Like most people, I was ignorant of that. I always considered myself a skeptic. And I guess in some ways I actually have been a skeptic.
Well,
because
you are, in my opinion, because you're very reluctant to draw conclusions.
very reluctant to, yes, exactly.
In
Yeah.
my opinion, and my understanding of you.
I've often said the church would have done itself a great favor throughout history if it would just admit when it doesn't know something.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a personal, I had a personal experience with Christ. And one thing that led to me was that I'm not much into Christian theology or anything. He didn't say a word to me about the Bible.
Tell us about that experience, though.
Well, I was in a really tough time. And I was there in my house all alone, and it was just a really tough time. And I always used to kind of think it was kind of silly that people would kneel in the presence of God, right? Like as though God is going to be flattered by somebody. But what happened was, so all of a sudden, he just came down on me. And I was sitting in my chair, and I realized what that kneeling thing is all about. It's not that it's a ritual of kneeling, it's that you can't stand up. I just melted into the floor.
So physically, did it feel like just a weight?
It felt like the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, but your muscles don't work. And so there was this conversation. And he encouraged me, and it changed my life. Yeah.
Wow.
But
You know how often
it
I've
didn't
said,
make me want to be a Christian, because it seems
no, I can
to me,
imagine it didn't.
no, because all of that is people
As funny
fighting.
as that sounds, but
It's like people fighting with each other. To me, it's like they are, and they love consigning each other to hell. Well, you're going to hell because you don't believe in the Trinity. When I was a kid in Porterdale, Georgia, there were two sects of Baptists, and they were always fighting and telling each other they were going to hell. And I swear to God, the difference was some of them believed that to go to heaven you had to be baptized upstream, and others said it was downstream. I'm not making this up.
no, I know you're not.
So, religion to me is, if I talk to God every day several times, if he had wanted me to be religious, he would have given me some indication by now.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you define religion, too.
Well, it
Definitions
does,
matter.
and that itself is a vague term. But
It is.
if you want to say
Very
that I
difficult to
love
define.
God and I talk to God all the time, and that's being religious, well, okay.
I prefer to, I guess I like to ruffle feathers. I don't know. But I grew up, in a non-Christian home, right? And so my introduction to Christianity was because my girlfriend went to church.
Oh, interesting.
But I was fascinated by the preacher and his use of language and, even just body language and everything, right? And I remember having the thought, I'd like to do that someday. What?
Yeah.
And
it's service.
And it was a really good bunch of people. It was a large Lutheran church here in Sarasota, and it was had just a lot of good people that really did serve the community.
I have been in an
admired
organization like that. My wife wanted to go to church once, and I said okay, and they're just really sweet folks.
Yeah.
And I talked to the minister. He knew all about my beliefs, and I told him one time, I said, well, to me, every time I walk across the street, I'm in the hands of God. And he said, well, you're a very unusual person for a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
But
you're an unusual person for a person.
God is totally in charge.
He is.
I'm just watching.
And you don't mean that in a deterministic way.
Oh, no. I mean that God is guiding this. Well, I think, and this is just Raymond Moody's opinion, okay?
Yeah, right.
But God hasn't tried to contradict me on it. And so what I think is, what we're in is these are God's stories.
Mm.
Who was the guy who escaped from Auschwitz, who lived after the wonderful Jewish scholar?
Oh, right. This is a phenomenon where somebody can't remember, and then the whole group of people won't be able to remember the name.
Yeah. It's,
Larry talks about this guy. He read his book.
Yeah. Anyway, he said, God made man because God loves stories.
I love that.
And I think that's just right.
Yeah. And we're definitely hardwired for stories.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In any case, I fell into, in my own story, I fell into evangelical kind of fundamentalist circles. I started school at Liberty University. Don't tell anybody. And and there I found that I really wasn't a fundamentalist. So it was a valuable experience.
So you had a great learning experience.
I did, yeah. And in any case, though, I took some of these views that, today I would not even give any credit to in Christian circles, but I can understand why people are turned off by religion. And one of the things they used to say all the time was, in my more evangelical circles, they would say, this isn't about a religion. This is about a relationship.
Yeah. That's what I think. Right on.
But when you break down, when you look at the etymology of the word, it's kind of what they were getting at, because it's just reconnect.
Yeah.
That's really what this word goes back to. It's a reconnecting. But language changes over time. And
I had this great friend who was a fundamentalist preacher in Atlanta. And his group was, you had to, in your training, you had to go out to country churches one Sunday to preach.
Mm-hmm.
And on one of these trips, he smashed in a car and pronounced dead on the scene. But they hauled him in, and he lived, and he was reflecting on his near-death experience. And he said, I was really surprised to learn that God wasn't interested in my theology. And he said, just like George Rizzi, what he was interested in was how I had learned to love and what I had learned in my life.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a pretty typical story from people that have had near-death experiences, or even any kind of transcendent experience, mystical experience, whatever you want to call it, is that they come out of that experience realizing that this is all about learning to love.
Yeah. Ideology is about fear. And what it has to do with is there's certain people, like to me, I am very happy to say, I don't know. That comes very easy to my lips. And I got that way when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I looked through a telescope for the first time. And I'd already been very curious. I was a curious person. And I looked through that telescope that night, and I thought, I'm never going to know much of anything.
Yeah.
And I'm content with that. But I've also learned in my life, some people are just terrified to say, I don't know. So what they resort to is a kind of active ignorance. Brad, people, because of a specific error in Greek philosophy with a philosopher named Xenophanes, it's a long story, but what happened was that in the history of Western thought, we have a theory of knowledge, but we don't have a theory of ignorance. But what people think naively is that ignorance is the absence of knowledge, right? Isn't that what people say? There's no knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, now let me put this scenario. Every year when I go to the family reunion, I spend a great deal of energy ignoring Uncle Hampert. I have to know at every moment where he is. I have to be listening constantly. Is that his voice? I have to be watching people so I can ignore Uncle Hampert. So ignorance is not an absence of knowledge. It's a way of processing knowledge, and it often comes from fear. Because there's a certain kind of person, it's like they're afraid that they're going to be burned in hell if they don't know something, right? So they make up these ideologies, which is a kind of mechanical thing. When I was in Porterdale as a kid, there used to be in the drugstore there was this machine, like a scale, and on top of it, it said, your weight and fortune for a penny, right? And so there was a little platform, and it had 12 slots, 6 on each side, and one was like January, February. Then then it was July through December, right?
Yeah.
But you could tell they all went into the same place. But anyway, you would have to drop your penny through the slot of your birth. Okay. Right? And then this little card would come out printed with your weight on it, and it had some indecipherable message. And
what do you mean indecipherable, like a koan?
Yeah, it's like beware in affairs involving a friend today.
Okay, so
right?
Overgeneralization.
That's right. And so that is how I see these religious ideologues. You just drop in your penny, and then you see some indecipherable. Israel shall slideth back as a backsliding heifer, and that seems to satisfy their curiosity. And I just feel sorry for those people. Mm-hmm. But the trouble is, I would feel sorry for them normally, but they're trying to take over and tell my children what they can read in school.
Yes.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. That's what it's come to. Yeah.
They want to propagate their ignorance
Yeah.
to everybody and ban books and anyway.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I absolutely 100% agree with you. And I am disgusted and disturbed by the whole thing.
And none of this is about God. This is about human beings.
It is. It's about fear in human beings and the need to control and to pretend that they have certainty about things that they can't possibly have certainty over. And it's just, it's a mess.
Yeah. And they're very vulnerable and sad. And I see these preachers take advantage of it.
Yeah.
You can edit this story out, but I was living in a little town once where there was this big socialite church, right? And there was this preacher who was a very pompous, stiff guy. And every Sunday, as I learned, the message was on abortion. And abortion will send you to hell. And, and that was constant. All right. Now, because I was a psychiatrist in this community, I found out about the following event. His 16-year-old daughter got pregnant. So he had to take her to Atlanta for an abortion.
Yeah.
And as a consolation prize, she got a new car. That's the kind of person who is trying to scare everybody else to death.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, you're right. And I will not edit that out if I have any say. Yeah. I think that's the...
And
this is just reality. This is the reality we're dealing with.
And abortion to me is horrible. I mean, I have two wonderful kids I love so much. We adopted at birth. So I am not...
pro-abortion.
I don't know what to think about abortion. What I'm saying is that this is nothing to do with abortion. This is evil.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What that preacher did.
This is fear, control through fear, and certainly not the way of Jesus of Nazareth.
No way.
So, well, anyway.
Incidentally, Jesus, in my view, was a humorist. He was very funny. He got me laughing.
That
at
doesn't
my
surprise
problems.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I think that the artist that did Laughing Jesus, I think that was a service. I really think that the people needed to see that.
I met a man down in Jacksonville, Florida, who had a near-death experience when he was in his 20s. He was in his 50s when I met him. This was in Jacksonville, I think. Years ago, I went to lecture, and he was telling about his near-death experience. And he said that he said, I forgot what it was happening. Like somehow he's just killed, and there he was in the presence of Jesus. And he said, Christ asked him, like, what have you done that you want to show me? And he said, in his panic, he said, I met Tom Mix. The Cowboys. And he said, Jesus said, is that right? Just that. And, just like laughing. He said he was laughing about it.
Yeah. That's funny. But actually, that brings up a question. I know we're going to talk about the chapter 6 here in a minute, but how many would you say? How many? And if you can put a percentage on it, that'd be great. But I know that's tough. It seems like I've read so many near-death experiences from people that are not of the Christian tradition.
No.
Who still see Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I met 2 Muslims who, in their near-death experience, they saw Jesus, which makes sense that, that Jesus is also a person in the Muslim.
Oh, yeah, extremely important in Islam. Mm-hmm. But I mean, Dr. Ravi, you did the foreword, I think, for his book.
Oh, yeah, the Indian guy.
Yeah. I can't remember his name now.
Raj.
Right. Is that what it was? The anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a Hindu. if I remember right.
Yeah.
But when he went through the tunnel, he met first
Christ.
with his relatives, his dad and
Yeah.
his grandfather and a lot of others down his line, and that all had to do with his own personal story and the abuse in his family and all that. But he also was met by two angels, Raphael and Michael. Michael and Raphael. And he said, I mean, I knew of them, but I was a Hindu, you know? And so here's Michael and Raphael escorting me, you know, down this tunnel. And then when he got to the light, he said, I don't know why I didn't see him or anything, but I just knew that it was Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that super common among non-Christians?
Well, you know, I just because of my cultural location and being an American, is that I haven't met many people who came from different traditions like that. But like I mentioned, the two Muslims I met who talked about seeing Jesus, and
but that kind of makes sense in their context because
yeah, right. But also, you know, I've talked to thousands of people, Brett, so I can't really be sure, but nobody comes to my mind that I've met who ever changed their religion because of a near-death experience, except for one person. And her name was Vi Horton, and Vi was in Augusta, Georgia, when I was in medical school, and she had the doctor who brought her back was a family friend, and he said to me, he said, Ray, she was dead for 40 minutes.
Wow.
And the reason he went to the resuscitation was not a medical reason. His daughter had been raised with her daughter. And so in the event, he couldn't bring himself to go out and tell the daughter. Right? So So he said, I'll try one more time. And then she came back. And she was a Southern Baptist, but she changed to the Catholic faith. And she said it wasn't that she felt that, you know, it was anything about hell or anything. It's just that she said that what she saw over there was most consonant with her understanding of the Catholic faith.
Which was probably pretty small, but...
Yeah. But also another person who said that was George Ritchie. And he said that what he saw, he said that what he was a Methodist, actually. He went to the Methodist church. But what he said was that what he saw was most consonant with what the Catholics had, and also, this is a surprise, the Mormons. And which is really interesting to me because after I published Life After Life in 75, I started getting all these rafts of letters from Utah. And what they were saying was that there's a Mormon tradition that they would record the near-death experiences in their families and bring them down. So that was part of it.
Is that right?
Yeah. And when I went to lecture at BYU, it was 10,000 people in that auditorium. And these kids would come up with their old, giving me their Xeroxed family records going back to the 1800s, like Uncle Smoot, you know, he almost died. And he said, so they had a vast repertoire of near-death experiences that they had accumulated in their... and also another thing they have is the Institute of Knowledge, which I've heard from a lot of people who have these very profound near-death experiences. They say there's this layering. They say there's one layer where people seem to stress, but they say it sounds horrible, but it's not really. He said, you see these people who are kind of not quite aware that they're dead, and they're repeating some action. But say it's not anything terrible because they say it's, I like to think of it as kind of like they got out of their body on the wrong side or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, and he said, but even among them, there are these enlightened people who are trying to wake them up. Then there's this other place where people are just focused on learning. And George Ritchie said he saw into one aspect of that place that you could kind of, by analogy, call a library. And he said one section of that library he saw into consisted of the holy books of the universe. Now, I want to say that George Ritchie he was the most feet on the ground more than any other person. The whole community of Charlottesville depended on him. And then beyond that, there's a realm of sheer light where people say it's like everything is made of light. So there's levels of this kind of. Yeah. And I got lost on where I was headed with that.
What's interesting to me is what you told me about the Mormons, what he said about the Mormons. Because, that's one of the groups I always made fun of. And,
well,
I'm not
easy
proud
to
of
make
myself.
Fun of.
But
They're easy to make fun of.
But and I looked into Mormonism because I had a fascination with what I called then pseudo-Christian cults,
Uh-huh.
But I've since, many years later, one of my favorite scholars is Dan McClellan.
Yeah, there's some bright folks there.
And he is he's an active member of the LDS.
Yeah.
And he never talks about it. He gets all kinds of flack for it, from Christians. But I just would love to have a one-on-one conversation with him about, like, why are you a Mormon?
Well, I can imagine some
tell me
people
this.
longing it for the social thing because these people are just so super nice.
Well, yeah.
It's just like, and a little bit naive, but they're just so nice usually. And so I can imagine that it would be pleasant to be around people like that.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is for him. I don't know.
It's the Coca-Cola is too strong for them. Right?
Well, they'd never have me at their party.
Yeah, well, I tell you.
I like bourbon.
Yeah, but they're just as sweet as they can be. So I could imagine that if I was looking for a social group to hang out with, it'd be pretty pleasant.
I imagine he probably has family ties there and all that too. But yeah, he was the Hebrew biblical scholar for BYU, I think.
Well, I know a lot of very brilliant Mormons.
Well, yeah, he's one of them.
Yeah.
He is, and I would never take that away from him. It just always struck me as
They're
weird.
having troubles now, though.
Are they?
The young people are drifting away fast.
Yeah. Well, and you can see the reasons for that.
Yeah.
That's happening all over religion.
Yeah.
Not even just Christian sects. It's happening all over. And it's well, there are a lot of reasons. We could do a whole nother talk on that. But all right, so let's talk about explain to us what chapter 6 is about. Like, give us an overview.
Yeah. Well, when I taught philosophy, I developed a teaching technique which I called logico spiritual exercises.
Yes.
And for many people's point of view, logic is way over here, and spirituality is way over on the other side, which is why some people have such a difficulty with thinking that the idea of a logical proof of life after death, right? Because the life after death is a spiritual question, if any, an essentially spiritual question, if any question is, right? So some people say, well, it's evil or sacrilegious to try to join those two. But in the historical reality, spirituality and logic were joined together from the very beginning. And I won't tell the story in detail, but every day we use the concept of truth, right? Mm-hmm. And I noticed from my own kids, it's my daughter especially, when they pick up the idea of truth is around the age of 3, when they realize that some things are the case, no matter what anybody thinks about it. That's what truth means. And that did not come here from this life. That concept came here from the afterlife. According to Parmenides, And Parmenides was the philosopher who, and apparently he had some connection with these oracles of the dead or these spiritual institutions, as we know from some of the statuary that has been recovered on him. But apparently he had a regular route that he would go to the underworld for whatever reason. But he said, on one of these trips, he said, I was abducted by a goddess, and she carried me into the underworld, and she sang me a song. And that song was the first written out logical deduction. Let me give you some background. In a pre-literate culture, people cannot grasp the concept of truth as that which is the case independently of what anybody thinks about it. And this is why. In that situation, the educated person was the person who knew a vast amount of oral literature by heart, right? And so memory was what was required. They had techniques of memory to enable you to memorize. And so what a logical deduction that you see immediately would be, Andy is taller than Bill. That's the first premise, right? Second premise, Bill is taller than Charlie, right? And the conclusion is Andy is taller than Charlie, and that is what we call a valid logical deduction.
Mm-hmm.
But in a pre-literate culture where the education was learning to memorize, people couldn't hold the premises in their head long enough to make the necessary connection with the conclusion. See? And so
because the memory was dedicated to
learn, just rote memory.
Okay.
Right? And so when Parmenides went to the underworld, and this goddess sang him this song, and it's the very first written out logical deduction. And she said, Parmenides, when you go back to Earth, don't tell people to believe this because the goddess says so. Tell them to work it out in their own minds and see it for themselves. And this was, see, most people were still illiterate. For a long time, a text was like a musical score. Hardly anybody can read the music today, but the person who does stands up there, right? Well, then it was, for a long time, that's how it was with reading. So what Parmenides did, he would read this to his students, and he would get them to sing the song over and over and over until it would dawn on them that if this is true and this is true, then that's true, right? And so that was where the word truth came in. It took another 100 years for Plato to say, just a minute here. We know that some sentences are the case no matter what anybody thinks about it. But by the same token, there are these other sentences that are not the case no matter what anybody thinks, and that is falsehood. So that was where Plato laid down the distinction between truth and falsehood. Which came along with that was the distinction between the literal and the figurative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this has a long history, but the gist of it is that according to its author, the notion of truth, which we use every day, came here from the other side.
Yeah. At least according to Parmenides. Crazy.
And by the way, in that context, see, the only thing the Greeks knew about that was beyond the human matter, no matter what anybody thinks, believes, or perceives, was the immortal, right? So that was also regarded as a spiritual leap. When this time we're talking about, the Greeks didn't have a distinction between the spiritual quest and the intellectual quest. I don't think that Plato would have even understood that, and probably not Aristotle either. And it was all the same. And I think personally that the separation came with Thomas. I'm not a historian, and I think this is probably false. But in terms of how I think about it, it looks to me like the turning point was Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, because they insisted that the universities that they founded be free of the religion. Over in Europe, it was all the same thing, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so it's like the distinction between the spiritual quest and the quest for knowledge is kind of or intellectual quest.
Well, then
is
it might have
kind
been
of recent.
Might have started with John Knox then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I think, as a spiritual person, I don't really see any distinction there. I see.
Well, me neither. I can't, to me, the spiritual quest and the quest for knowledge is one and the same.
I think so. And it was, we were talking earlier before the cameras were rolling, that Plato said that philosophy is just a rehearsal.
Yeah, philosophy is a
death.
rehearsal for dying.
For dying, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So clearly he didn't make much of a distinction at all between intellectual pursuit and spiritual pursuit.
I don't think he would have understood a distinction between the spiritual and the intellectual.
Wow. Okay, so on to chapter 6 then, with and how all that relates. You were highlighting figures of speech.
Mm-hmm.
We also talked about the need to understand that parapsychologists or paranormal studies and their scientism,
psychical researchers.
Yeah, psychical research. That all of that is a go nowhere.
It won't go anywhere.
Yeah,
and the reason is that. And I would have a class where I did what I call logico-spiritual exercises, and you can you take that word paranormal. When people look that up in the dictionary, the dictionary definition makes no sense whatsoever. That's why it was excluded from dictionaries for a long time. Like the OED, they fought tooth and nail against including that. But finally, the political pressure from the parapsychologists was what changed it. But when you look up the word paranormal, what it says is phenomena or things that are beyond the reach of science, right? Then they have a semicolon, then it says phenomena that are not scientific. And that's not a definition. That just tells you what it's not.
Yeah.
Not what it is.
Yeah.
But political pressure forced them to put it in. But they did this to make their pseudoscience legitimate. They were trying to find some word that put the kinds of things they're interested in together with the word science. That's all it was. But now the word has a meaning in ordinary usage, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at the ordinary usage and what you go through a series of 12 steps, you can come to the realization that the paranormal is a species of recreation, entertainment, and play with a spiritual focus. And I could give you 12 fact patterns that when you put them together, they add up. I could read them quickly.
Yeah, do that.
Okay, great. Each one of these has a reasoning behind it. But listen to this. Statement number 1. The paranormal revolves primarily around storytelling, a form of recreation. Most of what we do is we tell stories relating to seeing into the future, mind reading, or life after death. And what those have in common is that they all run against basic background knowledge in life. I mean, the stock market depends on the fact that we can't see into the future. Right? Mm-hmm. And if there was mind reading, we would all be embarrassed all the time. You know, and also in terms of life after death, in reality, nobody contemplates that there's going to be a knock on the door and the previous owner of the house who's dead, you know. And so those are background knowledge that we depend on. So what the stories of the paranormal are, that they contrast with that, right? The uncanny feeling it gives you is it's in contrast with something on another level, you know. Now, also, some people are going to say, well, you know, the paranormal is a spiritual thing to me, and to have it, I value my spiritual life higher than my leisure time activity. And so what that means is I should look up the word recreation. Because what it means in its root sense is recreation is spiritual consolation. That's what it means. And so it's not saying bad thing about the paranormal to say it's recreation. All right, so now...
Wait, give me that definition again. Recreation is
spiritual consolation.
Spiritual consolation.
Yeah.
Then I mean, doesn't the root go back to again and creation?
No, it doesn't. That was a different root.
Okay.
It's not about create. It's a different, and it was spiritual consolation was the original meaning. Now, all right. So the first proposition, the paranormal revolves primarily around storytelling. We love to tell the stories, a form of recreation. All right. Now, proposition number 2. The paranormal is often presented as stage shows, a form of recreation. We go to see the medium, and there's the table there with all the tapes and the books and the autographs and all.
Yeah.
And it's just like a big show. Number 3, and this is one of the most important ones. This is a historical statement, which is easily verified. The paranormal transforms into recreation, shedding connotations of the paranormal. Let me read that again. The paranormal transforms into recreation, shedding connotations of the paranormal. And this is a historical fact. All right, let me give you some examples. The Abecedarius, the ABC book, you go down to the Barnes and Noble, and there's dozens of them.
Yeah.
And what they are for is to entertain our kids as they're learning their ABCs, right? If you go back 2,000 years, the Abecedarius was a profound holy document. It was a practice for communicating with gods or delivering holy prophecies. Somebody told me there's about a dozen Abecedarii in the Old Testament alone, the most famous being the 119th Psalm.
119.
But it was a holy thing, like supernatural. Right now, flash forward, it's entertainment for kids. But you can still get, like Dr. Seuss and his Abecedarius, he went on beyond the alphabet.
He did.
He 22 extra letters, and very early so he says, in the places I go, there are things that I see that I never could spell if I stopped with the Z. I'm telling you this because you're one of my friends. My alphabet starts where your alphabet ends.
Yeah, this
Right?
guy was a mystic.
It's still, that's right, it's still. And so kites. We play with kites. They were originally a shamanic method for projecting the soul up. And you can still do it. I did it with my graduate students of psychology years ago. We went out in March and flew kites. And what we found is that if you really introspect, you can feel that kite, but you locate it up in the air. Yeah, I know it's uncanny, but you can do it for yourself. And you can practice so you can feel the kite up there. And you feel it projected just like the blind person, right? Feels through the cane, right? And so now it's for fun.
So when you say that they project Is that what you said? They project the soul?
It seems to me like that when we did it, that's how you feel. It's like, and you have to keep practicing, but you can get to the point where you can feel that kite higher, higher up, but you don't locate it here.
Where you're feeling it.
You locate it up there. And you can do this with a pen. Just put a pen down like this on the table, and then introspect and close your eyes and move that pen around. Where do you feel that? It's right there.
Yeah.
So then so anyway, kites, hobby horses, which is a kid's toy now. This was originally a shamanic implement for a guy with psychopomps would be there beside the bed of the dying person. And they would be, in their mind, they would be flying through the air like the witch broom, right? Like guiding the soul of the dying person to the... But now, see, it's a toy.
Well, explain what you mean by psychopomp.
A psychopomp was a shaman whose function was to be there with the dying person in the tribe who was maybe fearful of the process.
So a guide.
Yeah, so the psychopomp would guide the dying person across. And ventriloquism. Originally, and early ventriloquists weren't aware that they were doing it themselves. And you know, it can still be used to trick, see, but the shaman would have people in the hut and it makes spirit voices, right? So it was regarded in that context as supernatural, but now it's just an entertainment. All right? Masks. If you look at the history of masks, it was originally paranormal. Now it's for Halloween. Dolls, mountain climbing. Back in a long time ago, only a saint could climb the mountain because the demons were up there. But now, see, it's a popular recreation. And there's many other examples along this line, but the point is, there's one historical pattern where the paranormal transforms into recreation, shedding the associate. We don't think of it as a paranormal anymore.
Is this so from a cultural perspective, is this contributing at least to the increase in, agnosticism, or the nuns, the people that say they don't belong to any religious affiliation and so on?
Well, I don't know. That's an interesting thought, but I don't know.
But I mean, you could shout out a million examples of this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's these examples I gave under this number is just multitudes of them.
The thing
like
that
we were
seems...
talking the other day about climbing trees.
Yeah.
That was originally a shamanic method of ascent. Now it's something kids do in the summer.
Right.
See? And with the same effects. I mean, it was a thrill, right?
Right. You get a thrill, yes. But I wonder, here's kind of the sad side of that I feel. Maybe I'm wrong to feel this way, but the sense so many people, I think Kyle fits into this, they've lost a sense of wonder.
Yeah, I know.
Are you awake, Kyle? You seem like that kind of... You seem pretty typical for your generation that way. Maybe I'm being judgmental here. I don't mean it in a judgmental way, but there's no sense of wonder about things.
Yeah, I know.
But I wonder how much this has contributed. This tendency to turn all of this into recreation that's devoid of its spiritual roots.
Well, yes, and also, but it goes back to the spiritual constellation. See, it's like I talked the other day about how differently this is received in Europe, and here we think something is wrong about recreation because of the guys that went
Puritans.
to Boston and the Puritans, right? But over in Europe, they just, they relate to this immediately. They follow the reasoning. But here's number 4, okay? Statement number 4, the paranormal retains the connotation of the paranormal while transforming into recreation. An example of that would be Halloween. Originally, that really was people that spirits are coming out. Now it's just mask and good time and Halloween, right? Stage magic. It was originally regarded as something genuinely paranormal. Now it's the guy on the stage, but think of the iconography, right? There's all kinds of symbols.
Mystical kind of symbols. And,
yeah. And so now number 5, the paranormal is spawned from recreation. Let me give you an example. Tarot cards originated as a card game. Then for hundreds of years it had been a card game. Late in the 18th century, somebody made it into a fortune-telling thing. And along with that came stories. Before it was just a card game. Now the card reader has to tell you a story, a narrative, like, I see a dark-haired woman, or whatever. But see, it was started as recreation and became paranormal. So the paranormal in this case is spawned by recreation. My favorite example of this, which I got to see myself, in 1956, this really great guy named Elvis Presley appeared, right? And he just created a sensation. Then he died, and then all of a sudden people are seeing him and taking pilgrimages to his place. So, an entertainer, he's far from the only example of this. There's a lot of them historically, but Elvis is the one we know of. All right, so
Michael Jackson.
Yeah,
People see him too.
So
they both showed up at Mitch McConnell's hospital bed recently.
All right, terrific. so it's
we might have to edit that
out. And then
out.
Another great example recently is The Field of Dreams. That was an entertainment movie. And so in this little town in Kansas or Iowa, wherever it was, they went to film that movie. They made a baseball field as the stage set.
Yeah.
But when they filmed the movie and they left it, and they just left the baseball field there.
Yeah.
And now it's a pilgrimage site.
Is that right?
People go there, and when they go there, they see their dead relatives.
No kidding.
Right? Yeah. And so, number 5, the paranormal is spawned from recreation.
Okay.
All right. Now, number 6, the paranormal sheds connotation of the paranormal, becomes recreation, and reverts to the paranormal. When I was a kid, you'd see in the comic books the holy man would lie on the bed of nails or walk in his bare feet, and that was regarded as something paranormal, okay? Then it became like a recreation, like people would, and there was...
see it at the circus or something like that.
Yeah, they did, like there was what you call them, martial artist, went through a period of lying on the bed of nails, and it was like a discipline, right? And so, and it sounds like it, what you do is you can remember your experience of lying down on one sharp nail, and then you think it's multiplied by 40.
Yeah.
Right? But no, it's divided by, and so anyway, and so it went through a period of recreation, and then it came back as a paranormal thing. Back in the 80s, I saw this guy had a turban, and he did have some sort of surgical marks on his back, but it looked like a puncture, but probably just a plastic surgeon. And he would, and purple music and all, and then he would lie down on the bed of nails. So it went, so firewalking and bed of nails lying were originally a spiritual experience, then became recreational, and then reverted in some circles to the paranormal.
Well, you can see that. I mean, there's like seminars that are not seminars, but retreats that people go on just to firewalk.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have kind of transcendent experiences when they do it.
Right. Now, number 7, the paranormal transforms into recreation before being reconceived as a medical condition. You go back to St. Catherine of Siena, and what she did, she said, I'm not going to eat anymore. She would only eat bitter herbs. And even though that she was not eating, she would dash through the fields with the big fat friars trying to keep up with her, out of breath. And so she was made saint Catherine because of this paranormal ability. And then there were other fasting saints
Sure.
In Italy. Now flash forward to the 19th century. There was the phenomenon of the fasting girls, okay, and what these young girls would just say, "I'm not going to eat," and so they became pilgrimage sites. In one town in New Jersey, they had to build the railroad track further into the place where people could come and see this girl, and there were kids with hats on there. This way to the fasting girl. They would go up the hill and they would file through. And so it was a recreation, right? And now, the same thing, it's a medical phenomenon. You think of what we think of birth anomalies. It was originally thought as an omen. Like if somebody, a kid was a Siamese twin, that was an omen of something. Then in the 19th century, the Barnum, the freak shows, right? And now it's regarded as a medical thing. There have been others like that. Madness itself, originally regarded as demon possession. Then you go into the 17th century, and Bedlam becomes a amusement. On Sunday, they would open doors and let people go in and make fun of the inmates. Now it's a medical thing, all right? So the paranormal transforms into recreation before being reconceived as a medical condition. Now, number 8.
So the fasting girls were just anorexic?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, they had all the symptoms, but in the context, see, it was regarded as something funny, like where you can have fun with this by watching them. And it's just a different world, right?
Yeah, I'll say.
Now, number 8, the paranormal overlaps significantly with commercial enterprises that are classified as recreation. Gambling is classified as a mode of recreation. But when you go to Las Vegas, what do you see? Horseshoes, 4-leaf clovers, all the symbolism of the paranormal.
You see dice, which are modern lots.
Right.
Yeah.
And what they call recreational drug use. Think of that. And there was a great thing in Baltimore in the 1800s where this guy took nitric acid, or nitrous oxide, and he let people breathe. It was an entertainment, see. And also people go down to Peru to have the ayahuasca or whatever. Well, that's run by a tourist company. Or is that a recreation or is that a paranormal experience?
I think it's both.
It's both. There you go.
Yeah.
And so, to repeat, the paranormal overlaps significantly with commercial enterprises that are classified as recreation. Number 9, the paranormal's economic footprint resembles that of recreation. I've been doing these lectures and all since 1970-something. And I've observed over the years that when economic times get tough, I get more invitations to come.
Yeah.
And the movies had that same role in the Depression, right? The movies became big because it was, and so.
Because people could escape from
That's right. And so, now this might have changed now with the internet because there's all paranormal all the time now, right? But maybe this has now gone underground. But I can attest back in the 70s, that's how it was.
This is kind of interesting. What do you think of this? It's in line with this stuff. All that stuff, your feed, like on YouTube, let's say, okay, is determined by an algorithm.
Yep.
And it's giving you what you like to watch, right? So my feed is loaded with science channels, and then paranormal stuff. That's pretty much all you see on my feed.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
science
Yeah,
stuff
I
and
was a
paranormal stuff.
forensic psychiatrist, as you know, and my phone has figured out that I'm interested in homicide. So it's always, it's amazing how that did that.
He's going to show up on Dateline one day.
Right. So anyway, the paranormal overlaps significantly with commercial enterprises classified.
Yeah.
All right, now, and then number 9, the paranormal's economic footprint resembles that of recreation. Now, number 10, the paranormal's primary function in society is recreation. For most people involved in it, it's a hobby. It's something they do on their spare time when they have time. They join discussion groups to read books. They go out in the country with the witching stick. They read Nostradamus to get the prophecies in. So it's a hobby. It's something they do in their recreation. All right, now listen, this one is a big one too, and this one always comes to a shock. The common law is a great storehouse of wisdom. And what the common law represents is what the people in certain eras regarded as the wisest and most judicious people of their era. They came up with the common law. All right, so J.L. Austin pointed that out. The common law is a great source of what the practical person of common sense thinks. So the big question is, like everybody else, the mediums and psychics have to go down to City Hall to get a business license.
Yeah.
So how does the law classify the paranormal for purposes of recreation, for purposes of licensure? Mediums and psychical researchers are classified as recreation workers. That's right. Now, number 12. Now, at some point, people might say, but what is he saying? I've seen on the talk show the other week, there was scientists talking about mediums and all. And so what's that all about? If it's just recreation, why do you have these experts? Well, what I say is this, that the paranormal's framework of debate, there's a standard way of people debate it. And that standard framework is credibly described and classified as recreation. Let me explain. Parapsychologists, which anybody who really understands scientific method, those folks are very naive and wonderful and sweet, and I love them, but they're just completely naive, and they're victims of scientism. But what is parapsychology in reality? Let's take in terms of they're trying to prove life after death. Okay. What I say is that if you think it through, life after death is an inherently comical notion, and I don't mean non-serious. I mean comical in the literary sense that a comedy portrays a happy ending.
Okay.
And what happier ending could there be for me or you than that there's a life after death, right? And so what parapsychology is, it's a mode of comic, in terms of literary term, as a mode of literature, it's comedy because it portrays that
there's a happy
death,
ending.
A happy ending. But not only that, since tragedy ends in a death, comedy, parapsychology is actually metacomedy. It's a high because it goes and it incorporates the end of tragedy. Okay. Now, and anybody who's followed it knows that parapsychology is a failed profession. That's the reality of it. But where does it most appear? Ghostbusters movies. Mm-hmm. And so what the Ghostbusters movies are so funny because the comic incongruity is that this completely failed profession that's never produced anything now does all these spectacular things on So it's inherently comical. Now, where the skeptics reside, that is a mode of satire. And their primary figure was Lucian of Samosata, one of the greatest, funniest guys who ever wrote. And he was the original, he was Hellenistic. And he went around and exposed...
Which means he came after Alexander's conquest.
He was... He was the one who invented all these ways of making fun of all these pretenders and everything that they've taken. And also their magazines, they're not scientific magazines. They consist of satire, social commentary, right? And exposés, like exposing the fraud. They do a good job in that. And then the third group that is pretends to expertise on the paranormal is the demonologist, right? And they say, oh, this is all, the Ouija board is going to get you in touch with demons and such. Mm-hmm. And that mode of literature is horror. See, it's a mode of horror literature. I saw some years ago there's a haunted house tradition in Halloween in the United States, and this fundamentalist group together, and they had made themselves a horror show for Halloween. And one of the scenes was this young man who was dying of AIDS, and they had him all surrounded. And this is entertainment for them, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, and let me go back and just let me read them quickly all at once, okay? Mm-hmm. And number one, the paranormal revolves primarily around storytelling, a form of recreation. Number two, the paranormal is often presented as stage shows, a form of recreation. Number three, the paranormal transforms into recreation, shedding connotations of the paranormal. Number four, the paranormal retains the connotation of the paranormal while transforming into recreation. Number five, the paranormal is spawned by recreation, tarot cards or Elvis. Number six, the paranormal sheds connotation of the paranormal, becomes recreation and reverse to the paranormal. The bed of nails, the firewalking. Number seven, the paranormal transforms into recreation before being reconceived as a medical condition. St. Catherine, the birth anomalies. Number eight, the paranormal overlaps significantly with commercial enterprises that are classified as recreation, gambling and recreational drug use. Number nine, the paranormal's economic footprint resembles that of recreation. Number 10, the paranormal's primary function in society is recreation. Number 11, the paranormal is defined by law as recreation. And number 12, the paranormal's framework of debate is credibly characterized and described as recreation. Now, what I bring on, and I beg anybody, see, I really mean this, if anybody can find any other conclusion from these 12 facts of established historical, sociological, legal facts, then I beg you, please, because I want to know. But failing that, this is what I've come up with as my definition. The paranormal is a species of recreation, entertainment, and play that is intrinsically related to the spiritual life. Now, for that reason, my implication of this is the rational study of life after death has to absolutely be separated from the paranormal. That is a form of recreation, and the whole language that it surrounds it is a recreational language. In order to get to a rational proof of an afterlife, which is it's just this close. We're really getting close to it. But you have to abandon that way of recreational thinking. This is a serious question. And by applying your mind seriously to thinking this through, we can get to a point where we are just, I think we're pretty close to a rational proof of an afterlife. And what is happening is, Brett, the afterlife is coming here. You think, go back to 1950. You weren't born then, but you can just think of 1950. Nobody knew about near-death experiences. They occurred, but they were extraordinarily rare. Then in the 60s and 70s, the invention of CPR.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are being brought back from a state that in 1950 would call death. And what they tell us is the same story. What that means is everybody alive, practically everybody knows somebody personally who's been to the other side.
I do.
So
Yeah.
a series of net points on the earth are being, connected with things that happen on the other side. So the afterlife is coming here.
What's interesting to me from a Christian perspective, right? And when I say that, I mean that's the cultural.
Yeah, your culture.
Right, that's my culture.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that Christianity is the perfect, or I don't think there's any version of Christianity that's the perfect explanation for the hereafter or whatever. But that's my frame of reference.
Yeah.
So, but there are a lot of interesting kind of parallels here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is that what Jesus seems to have wanted to establish, and the reason that he made disciples and told others to make disciples was in order to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth.
Exactly. And he's doing it. I mean,
I think so. And I think that near-death experiences and maybe other forms of other practices that lead to transcendent experiences are doing that too. And the great unifier between all of that is the emphasis on learning to love each other.
Yeah. And to learn.
Yeah.
Those are the two things. It's like people say, they all say, what he was interested in was how I learned to love. And then a lot of people say, but scenes would occur when I was learning something. They say it was like he would focus in. They say it's not like words, but that the focus would be, as George Ritchie put it, he said that what he pointed out when he said, in the times that I was learning, he said, even after you come on over here, that will go on. And George said that the process of knowledge, I gather, goes on quite literally for eternity.
Which is thrilling, I think.
Yeah.
A guy that's a good friend, but he's really more like a son to me. He used to be terrified when I met him when he was a kid, and he was in my youth group, and he used to be terrified of the notion that we would live forever.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Because he's highly intelligent, and so when you speak about eternity to him, his mind goes to
eternal
what
boredom.
That actually is. Most people think of eternity and they don't think of it as unending, or they don't even spend any time thinking about it.
That's right.
They just think, well, that's heaven. But he doesn't do that. He focuses on, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What would we possibly do?
That's right.
After 1 trillion years, you're just at the beginning.
Yep.
So,
very good.
But this is the theological answer to that is that God is eternal. So, and if God is the wellspring of all being, then there is an eternity to learn.
Yeah.
There's eternal material to learn. So, to me, that's thrilling. All right, so it has to be divorced. Any rational approach to the study of life after has to be divorced from the paranormal.
Yeah, I think so.
recreational paranormal anyway. So I have a friend of mine who is in the hospital right now. And while he is not very interested in any of the paranormal stuff, his family is very interested. And they come to me with really crazy stories. I mean, they've even shown me text messages that they say, how did this text message come from their son who passed?
Yeah.
And photographs of orbs and all this stuff, right? So
I give up. I mean, I know all of this stuff. But to me, these are transcendent experiences.
Right. So when you say it has to be divorced from the paranormal, you don't mean to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm asking you. You don't mean to say that what people refer to as their paranormal experiences are untrue.
No. Oh, no, absolutely not. The problem is that when people use this recreational language of the paranormal to try to cope with them, see, and it's in the paranormal, logic can't just be as it is. It has to compromise with the recreational side of it, see, for it to be paranormal. But it's the experiences defy categorization and understanding in terms of that casual, it's, for example, some of their arguments, all right? When I first started out in this field, I went to these conferences where there were people who were interested in the paranormal, and I heard this argument one time. It's like there was a conference, and then after the conference there was a get-together of all the participants and the experts who were there and all. And so I was standing in this very congenial group of folks, and he said, science, they're rejecting this, but he said, but if you put it in the court of law, he said, did you put it to a trial, it'd be,
there'd be a conviction.
Be proven if in a trial of court of law. And I've heard this a lot of times, and you have too. Right? Mm-hmm. So what I said, well, would it be a civil case or a criminal case? And so there was a big group of people around, and they were all, when he said this about the law court, everybody was saying, like, yeah. And then I said, well, would it be a criminal case or a civil case? And then everybody just sort of froze, and they said, And I said, because, arguably the standard of proof in a criminal case is higher than the scientific criterion. So this man very graciously said, good point. But, it's all that is, it's just like they go through a scenario in their mind, and this trial is conducted, but nobody ever, how would they select the judge? How would they select the jury? Would it be criminal or civil? They don't think about that.
Yeah.
All it does, it gives them this pleasant feeling. But I did
of validation,
notice,
you mean?
That's right. Mm-hmm. And all of those folks, they did see my point, and they said, good point.
And maybe that's because it's not that all these folks that are wrapped up in the paranormal are not open to what is real. Yeah. It's that they don't really. It takes to really think through the question of an afterlife. You've got to be able to understand basic logic. That's the reality. And most people logic is not their favorite thing. We absorb things, but if you really know about the reasoning process, then there is a way to get through to the rational proof of an afterlife, but you've got to leave the flimsy reasoning behind. You've got to really put your mind. So that's the main reason for divorcing from the paranormal, the recreational aspect of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here one of the challenges that you issued to us was you wanted us to poke holes in things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Because, see, I want to find out the truth. In my point of view, if somebody reads my book and they say, hey, Raymond, here on page 220, there's this mistake, that leads me closer to the truth by finding my error.
Yeah, and I respect that.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't really be able to call yourself a philosopher if that weren't your attitude, right?
The most influential professor I ever had, he had a PhD in philosophy, and he said, I don't call myself a philosopher. He said, I call myself a student of philosophy. And that's I don't call myself a philosopher. I'm a student of philosophy. I have a PhD in it, and I was a professor of it, and my attitude was always that I'm a student.
Well, and that makes sense if you understand much at all about what philosophy is. You're always learning, and as a skeptic, you're not arriving at conclusions.
That's right.
Okay, so
can I say a word about that? I realize fully the difficulty in 2026 of coming up with a conclusion that there's an afterlife, but now I do think that is possible, right?
Even as a skeptic?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that a conclusion that there's an afterlife is possible. But the way I think of it as me is that where I've come, I realize why in 2026 you can't draw a logical conclusion yet. But what I say is, I gather that there's an afterlife. And what I mean is, I give up.
Right.
I've thought through every possible objection, and I just can't think my way out of it. So what I have to say is, I gather that there's an afterlife.
That's fair.
And I'm kind of predicating my life on that. I'm expecting it. By the way, in terms of God, people ask me, Raymond, do you believe that God exists? Say, absolutely not. Because as a human being, I realized that any belief that I could form about God would be bound to be off base.
Sure.
Right? So what I say is, I have a relationship with God. And I don't need to think, when people say God exists, they're trying to argue about whether God exists. As a logician, it'd take me about 30 minutes, but I could sit here and I could explain to you what it means to assert that something X exists. And I could even show you how to symbolize it. But when it comes to God, God neither exists nor doesn't exist. The concept of existence is not in the same universe of discourse as God. To me, God is a relationship. And the question of God existing or not existing doesn't arrive. And belief doesn't arrive either, because I give up. I know I can't have any accurate belief about God, but I'm dependent on my relationship with God.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the mystics, they all kind of arrive there.
Yeah.
So I think I get what you mean. Now, to the average person,
it sounds bizarre.
It sounds bizarre.
It's only because they haven't been educated in logic.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then, that would be the whole. Okay. So then, how do you arrive at a rational proof of the afterlife?
Okay.
By the use of nonsense, which the average person understands to be something that is.
That's right. But it's all a misunderstanding. See, and let me explain. David Hume, the great skeptic, said, by the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Now there's an understatement. And he went on to say accurately, some new species of logic is requisite for that purpose, and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. Then some time later, A.J. Ayer, that you probably read about in school, the great logical positivist, said, in our language, it is permissible to say that a man survived a complete loss of memory or complete change of personality. But it's a self-contradiction to say that a man survives the annihilation of his body. And you know, they are right, and David Hume was absolutely right when he said that we can't prove an afterlife with the mind we have and with the logic we have. That is a solid truth. And it's what all of the so-called experts like the parapsychologists miss. They actively ignore Hume and Ayer and the other. See, they just don't even think about that, as I know from interacting with them, because they can't wait to get to the laboratory, right? They don't think conceptually. All right, but what I say is that what all of those so-called experts miss is that we can't prove the afterlife with the mind we have and the logic we have. That is a reality. All right, so what that has resulted in, and the way Westerners think, is that they drew a false inference from that. And the false inference was just a figure of speech called idiomaton. And what they concluded was that rational proof of an afterlife is impossible, was what they drew. And I say that's absolutely false. And I could take 10 minutes to show you why it's false.
Then that's what we should do.
Okay, now, to sum up the skeptical conclusions of Hume and the logical positivist view of the verification, right? Just to think is that they assume that that is a fixed situation. But I say it's simply not, because it is very easy to add logical rules and principles onto our present logic, which when you do them, then opens up faculties of your mind that you didn't know you had. Okay? And so let's do it here. I'll do it in 10 minutes.
Okay.
All right? So, Hume and Ayer together say that you cannot prove that there is life after death because it transcends the logic we have, and so now. Aristotle, the way he built the logic that we use, that he predicated it on literally meaningful, true or false propositions.
Yes.
Okay, and so that's where now a common sense assumption made about nonsense is totally wrong. Because what people say when I taught this decades in my logic courses, okay? So when you ask people to formulate what the word nonsense brings to their mind and ask them to put the image, they say they see a blank void or like a wall with nothing behind it, and chaos and emptiness and just nothingness. All right? And they say it's something bad, right? And it's something unknowable. All right, so if...
So it has a pejorative
yes, a pejorative. That's right. And that's because there's two words. Nonsense with an exclamation point is an interjection, and it performs the speech act of apodeoxis, which is rejecting something.
Yeah.
The noun form is, the meaning of the noun is language which is unintelligible due to lack of meaning. Dr. Seuss, Lewis Carroll, glossolalia. Okay, so...
Speaking in tongues.
If it's true, as common sense says, that that nonsense is a void of emptiness and nothingness and chaos, then that means that there aren't any different types of nonsense, right?
Yeah, because there's nothing there. Yeah.
All right, so listen to the following sentences. "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe." That's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Now listen to this sentence. "Holiness breeds the vestigial lipstick of spontaneity." That's nonsense, right? Now listen to this sentence. "That cannibal you men just ate was the last one in this county." That's nonsense, right? Now listen to this. "Hat thoroughly the if well zoom how zest." That's nonsense. And there, or that's nonsense too. So what? There's lots of different types of nonsense. So nonsense cannot be chaos and emptiness and nothingness. But not only that, the average view of the common sense is that if this is the level of ordinary meaningful language, nonsense is down here, right? You can quickly think through and see that that is absolutely false. That in reality, if this is the level of ordinary meaningful language, nonsense is up here. Because you can explain the meaning, you can explain a segment of meaningful language just by referring to the linguistic rules it follows. But to explain a sentence of nonsense, you have to do two things. Number one, you have to identify the rules of language that it follows, and then you have to identify the rules of language that it breaks. For example, "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe." Okay. That sentence is grammatically correct English. It follows the rules of English grammar because you can tell "'twas brillig and the slithy toves." All right, what part of speech is slithy?
Adjective.
Adjective. What part of speech is toves?
Noun.
Noun. Right. All right. So, but those words are meaningless, so they violate the rule of language that says when you speak, you only use words that have a lexical meaning.
Yeah.
Right? But now, do those words sound like Polish words?
I don't know.
Do they sound like Russian words?
No.
Do they sound like French words?
No.
Do they sound like English words?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Old English words, yeah.
So it's like, and I call that form of nonsense Near English nonsense. And when my students in my classes, when they see the pattern, then they have to write their own examples of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, by the way, you can take
following the rules of grammar.
You can take that formula, and you can make, by the same transposition rules, you can make Near French, Near German, Near Portuguese. All right.
Okay.
So, but that's only just one category. So Near English respects the grammatical rules of English and respects the rules of word formation in English, but it violates the rules that when you
no lexical meaning.
Yeah, that you have a lexical meaning. Number two, holiness breeds the vestigial lipstick of spontaneity. That's a different pattern because all the words are meaningful, right? You know every word means.
Yeah.
But the difficulty is it violates category rules. What category rules are that certain kinds of expressions can take certain modifiers but not others. It makes sense to say that a square root of a number is minus or negative or positive, odd or even, but it doesn't make any sense to say that a square root is chartreuse.
Right.
Right? And then that cannibal you men just ate was the last one in this county. That is a self-contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does, it follows all the grammatical rules of English, perfectly grammatical, but it violates the rule of assertion that and by asserting something in the same word, it takes it back. thoroughly the if, well, Zoom, how zest. Well, that's just putting words together in an anti-grammatical form, right? And pseudo language is lovely. It's just making up an imaginary language. It's a device of fiction and all. But I could go on and on and on. You can make nonsense on any kind of regular language, any kind of any format of ordinary meaningful language. You can use that format to make an equivalent form of nonsense, like a nonsense story. Dr. Seuss tells whole stories just out of nonsense. Mm-hmm. Or you can make a nonsense recipe. Add 3 twigs of bacon judges rises in, and then Dr. Seuss has some good nonsense recipes. So any form of meaningful language, you can put a layer of nonsense down over the top of it, and you can make something that sounds like the meaningful language of that form.
And there dozens. Why do we do that?
Why do you do it? Well, because it's fun. For Dr. Seuss, it was fun. And for Lewis Carroll, I mean, it's just kids have fun with nonsense. They do. My kids, I noticed, all of them played with nonsense. When kids are learning a new concept, they often lapse into a nonsense version of it. I remember a kid at a playground where I once was, and I've told you 11-5 times to stay off. It's just, so nonsense is a presence among us that we devalue. Although, in their hearts, people love nonsense.
Right.
But it's like because of this ridiculous mistake, they can't get out of their mind that there's a difference between the interjection, which is a pejorative, and the noun, which can be a wonderful thing.
So then I guess the reason I'm asking, so it seems like it's not just about fun. It seems like it's more than that.
Oh yeah, nonsense can be fun, but also it can be very powerful. In science, for example, nonsense is what I call a placeholder. That wonderful professor of physics from NYU who's always on TV, Dr. Mick Haku, I think.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I heard him on one of his Discovery Channel things. He said, the 2 most powerful physical systems ever devised are the general theory of relativity and the quantum theory. But he says, well, the difficulty is that when you combine the equations, it's utter nonsense. He said. And so in science, nonsense is something we use as a placeholder. We hold on to it knowing there's faults to it, but with the anticipation that eventually we're going to be able to make sense of it.
So in a real sense, at least in his example, you can't, unless you put a placeholder there,
you
can't move on.
You got to use nonsense as a placeholder. There's so many examples of it. The one that's really big now is the what do they call them? The nonsense versions of it were called mixed beast, but now what do they call that research? Something. Anyway, it's the mixing up of the species and to make kittens that glow in the dark. And it has a name. It's the Greek name, but anyway, see, it's back in the 1920s. This was a very popular form of nonsense. Like they would have the kangarooster, or and the nonsense first, and now it's like making kittens that grow in the dark is something that scientists are working on. See, so what was nonsense was a placeholder where now we can actually do these things with the discovery of DNA and such.
Okay, so with a proper understanding of nonsense as
language that is unintelligible due to
right.
being meaningless.
it becomes an important piece in the rational proof of an afterlife.
That's right. Because once we have a system of rules that govern how we think about nonsense, a nonsense logic, then it opens up a lot of stuff. The ones I'm focused on is the life after death, but it opens up, and over the years, I've had a lot of professionals would attend my seminars on nonsense. And I have had these phenomenal responses. And the strongest response was people in the advertising business. And I went to Colorado and did a seminar, and there were these guys from a advanced advertising agency and said, Ray, he said, what we're all about is getting attention. And this is, people pay more attention to nonsense than they do to ordinary meaningful language. So they got hepped up about it. Medical doctors. When I was in medical school, I already had my nonsense logic in my mind. And so when I started going around on the wards, I would see that patients would talk nonsense. That delirious people, for example, just talk nonsense, or schizophrenic people make up meaningless words, or people who are in severe stress, and they come in, they're not injured, but they're just talking a little out of they can't bring words together because of the stress. Or even in your sleep, as the hypnagogic state, many people will say as they're drifting into the hypnagogic state, they hear nonsense words and such. And so what I pointed out to my professors was that the different patients talk nonsense, but when they do, the types of nonsense they speak correspond to the types we have. For example, patients who are delirious talk categorical nonsense, like the one. People who are schizophrenic will.
We'll give an example of that. The categorical.
Categorical would be like the sentence. Holiness breeds the vestigial lipstick of spontaneity.
Oh, okay.
See, that's just, the categories don't match. So when people are delirious, that's how they talk. People who are schizophrenic, they make up meaningless words, but they sound like English words. In 1985, I went to France, and I was talking to a young doctor over there, and a young psychiatrist, and I said, when French patients make up French schizophrenic patients make up, neologisms is what we call them.
Yeah.
Do they sound like French words? He said, yeah, they do. See, so even in that place where you seem so lost, you're still following words.
Yeah.
And so I was a third-year medical student, and the internal medicine department asked me to come and talk to them about my findings. And then in another case, I was teaching a course on nonsense.
They asked you to come and talk about nonsense.
Yeah, because they saw the medical implications of it, see? And to them, it was just an interesting, that, wow, you can tell these different patterns.
Okay, so.
Oh, but one other.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then I was teaching 20 years ago, I had this big nonsense course, a semester course, and it was one of these auditorium buildings, like, where the seats go up like that. And the first night I saw this elderly man, and he was sitting in the middle row, right, and like about halfway up. Mm-hmm. Second glance, he was already all the way down to the front row, right? And I got to talking to him. He said he was a retired lawyer. And he said, what we're all about is critical thinking. All right? And the next semester, he came back and took the same course, but he brought two of his legal colleagues with him. So what I'm saying is this is a very general kind of thing, but the specific application to the question of an afterlife is this, that right now, the words like life after death and such are placeholders. There's something out there, and we're just trying to figure it out. And let's look at how this bears on the near-death experience specifically. Okay, now, remember that I said that you can take any form of ordinary, meaningful language and you can lay a layer of nonsense down over it, and it sounds like that kind of language. One of my favorite, you can take a travel narrative, for example.
Okay.
And you can lay a layer of nonsense down over it, and it sounds like a travel narrative. To give a very brief example, when Lincoln was president, it was a very solemn state ceremony, right? Everybody was gathered around. And his place in the ceremony was to mount a horse in front of all these people and then lead a procession away from the scene. But when Lincoln got up on the horse lifted its own back hoof up and got it caught in the stirrup. So the horse was bouncing around, and everybody was shocked into silence, so embarrassed for the president. Oh, how embarrassing, right? So Lincoln looked down at the horse and said, "Well, if you're getting on, I'm getting off." Which is nonsense to say that, right?
But the horse can't get on itself,
But it creates a very vivid image of that. Now, what in the world does this have to do with near-death experiences? What people say is, I don't have any words for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it did not take place in time. No time passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not in the spatial world anymore. But the only way I can describe this is, I got out of my body, I went through a tunnel, I met my deceased relatives, I saw my life pass in review, I returned to my body, and I came back to life. That is a travel narrative.
Yeah.
Right. Now, hold that thought for a minute. People speak nonsense under several circumstances. One, people speak nonsense deliberately to make money and to have a creative life, right? Mm-hmm. Dr. Seuss, Lewis Carroll. Dr. Seuss's books, in an article, this was 10 years ago, I read, an article in the New York Times that said that as of that writing, Dr. Seuss's books have sold 600 million copies.
Wow.
So what that means is, does that mean that nonsense is something bad? Who hasn't read Alice in Wonderland? My point is that, anyway. So some people do it deliberately as an art, right? Other people speak nonsense inadvertently. As, for example, the coach says, you guys pair up in threes, right?
Yeah.
But if you go to the coach and say, look, coach, pair up means two, and he's in a clear state of consciousness, he will correct himself, right? Mm-hmm. So it's inadvertent. But the third type is involuntary, and that's like the delirious person or the psychotic person. And if you try to correct them, they're not correctable. See? So that would be involuntary nonsense. So, what this all means is, since there's a long story behind this, but I found out in 1977 or 78 that people can take their knowledge about near-death experiences that they learn from other people, and then there's a feedback experience. So, because when they have a near-death experience, subsequently they will remember. For example, the first time I saw this was in New Jersey. It was about 78 or 79. I was invited for a lecture. And after the lecture, the host couple had a backyard barbecue. Okay? And so the woman said, she said about a year or so ago, she had had a cardiac arrest during a gallbladder, almost died. And she said when she got out of her body, she said, and I was thinking, this is just like in the book. right? So that means that you can take your knowledge about, near-death experiences over with you, and then it makes you realize, well, now, what I've found is that my nonsense logic, it works the same way. People can take it over. And what this means is that somebody in a clear state of mind who has a nonsense logic already in their mind, that when they have a near-death experience and try to relate it, they will realize that the travel narrative format is unintelligible.
Yeah.
So just like the coach, they will shift it. Guess what? It's already happened. There was this wonderful man. I hate to use his name, but he's very eminent. He is a distinguished scientist and also a sculptor of great talent. And he went to one of my nonsense seminars years ago, and several years later he called me. He had been in the hospital for 60 days with H1N1, lost his leg to gangrene, had 3 cardiac arrests, and during that had near-death experiences. And so he called me and was talking about this, and he said, and all of a sudden his voice was very weak. He shifted. And said, and Ray, he said, while I was over there, he said, my mind went back to the nonsense seminar, and he said, and I realized that what you're saying is true. You can't comprehend how that world is connected to this world unless you take the unintelligibility axis into account. So now what that means is that once we get a number of people who've had a near-death experience, who went into their near-death experience with not only the regular logical Aristotle in their mind, but also now additional logical principles for thinking about nonsense, then they will be forced to talk about it in a different way, right? They'll shift their realization of it. Now, how in the world do we know that it's 4.3 light years out to Alpha Centauri? Everybody knows it's 4.3 light years to Alpha Centauri. Mm-hmm. But how did they figure out that? The pigeons I sent out there, the homing pigeons I sent out there when I was a kid, they haven't come back yet. Had an odometer on there. How did they figure out that one? Well, it was long regarded that the distances to the fixed stars were unknowable until 1838.
Yeah, you mentioned this in the book.
1838, right. And by then they knew it was 186,000 miles across the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. So you measure the angle here, then you took the star here, then you wait exactly 6 months, you measure it again, and that is called parallax. That's how you calculate it. Now we have a parallax method for this. See, what we can do is we know what the near-death experience looks like through the lens of Aristotelian logic, which makes it a travel narrative. In the not-too-distant future, we're going to have plenty of other people who've had this experience, who have not only the Aristotelian logic, but supplementary logical principles for thinking about when something is unintelligible. And by looking at those two, the difference will be the afterlife.
Okay.
And we're on the road to it.
So it's not something that's been achieved.
No, but I'm saying that it will work. I mean, I think the case with this the scientist is a proof of principle. Because it makes sense that it would happen just by thinking about it, but the fact that he confirmed it, but other people will be confirmed.
The guy that had the 3 cardiac arrests, is that who you're referring to?
And by the way, I didn't talk to him much about this aspect of it, and this is why. I had known him before, this event, And so I knew that one of the great tragedies of his life was that he saw his 2-year-old son killed in a fire.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He couldn't do anything. So what am I going to talk to him about, right?
Yeah.
My theory and my experiment,
Right.
Or I'm going to get to talk about, So, but that was just a glitch. But this is going to work.
I think that so we run into this a lot, like the problem with explaining this kind of stuff to somebody who's experienced such a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
In pastoral work.
That's right.
Okay, there's a time and place. But the truth is that I think that that's been exaggerated in the minds of a lot of pastors, or they have they don't want to talk about let's say near-death experiences with people who are on the cusp of dying, because they don't understand it enough or something, and they chalk it up to, well, there's a time and place to talk about that sort of thing. And but I think it's profoundly comforting. My experience has been when I talk to people that they're facing their mortality, they're within. In some cases, they were within days, some weeks, and that they were comforted by those discussions. But this, I'm still failing to see how, and I imagine a lot of people are still struggling to put this together. The nonsense logic. Mm-hmm. And is it just because I keep holding on to a false definition of nonsense, or is it because unintelligible and logic seem like they don't mix, like oil and water?
And that's only because of a lack of education. Anybody who really sits down and thinks this through. I mean, I've always asked people, well, these look to me like different types of nonsense. Do they seem to you? And they say, yeah. But that contradicts the common sense point of view that it's normless and formless. See, nonsense is not something, if this is ordinary meaningful language, nonsense is not something down here. It's something up here, because you have to go through, it's a more complicated thought process. You have to process not only the rules that it follows, but also the rules that it breaks. See, so it's a more complicated mental operation.
Right. So if I employ glossolalia, for the average person or average Christian anyway, they just know it as speaking in tongues.
is an example of how nonsense can lead to spiritual experiences.
Yes.
And it's not the only one. There's the koans. It's the same thing.
For the Buddhists. Zen Buddhists use koans.
That's right. Yeah. And then the other one was, nowadays it's a doctrine, but if you go back to the Middle Ages, the Trinity was not a doctrine. It was a spiritual exercise.
Yeah, for the Cappadocian Fathers, it really, as much as they applied their reasoning faculties to it, at the end of the day, the Cappadocians didn't try to come up with this.
Yeah, it was absolute, like a koan, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They would refer
for meditating
to
on
it,
the identity
with all
of
kinds
God.
of colorful language, like the circle dance. In the beginning was the relationship, and that sort of thing. So, I can. It's like I can kind of, in one sense, wrap my mind around how unintelligible language can be formulated into, or can be joined with logic, but there's another sense in which it just seems so opposite.
Well, that's just a psychological thing, really. Because
so you would have to say, though, like, if it's going to be a proof, right? Mm-hmm. Then the nonsense logic would have to be something that has structure to it.
It does.
And it's observable.
It is.
Okay. So then, in the logico-spiritual exercise, how is nonsense employed How is nonsense logic employed? And what is it achieving?
Well, it achieves different things in different contexts.
Okay.
Like for people in commercial advertising, it's a way of getting attention.
Okay.
Because people pay more attention to nonsense than they do. It's, for example, there's something called double talk that magicians do. It's like, did the sermon on the water soul last night? And what people will do when they hear that, they will blame themselves, that they're hard of hearing or that they're going crazy. But it has, okay, and so there's different types. And in glossolalia, the formula is that it consists of nonsense syllables drawn from the speaker's own language, combined in a way to avoid meaningful combinations or grammatical structure. And when you utter that constantly, as I have found and as you've found, it really does put you into a profound state. I mean, I can easily imagine being in that state where God could get through to you more easily.
So then is the employment of nonsense just there to expand your consciousness into transcendent states of consciousness?
Well, it could be, or it could be for your profession. Like what the lawyer told me and his two colleagues was, this helps us think about, they said it just makes us think more clearly. And so, also some of them said, the judge sentenced my client the other day to 3 consecutive life sentences plus 4 years, and
Okay.
And the medical doctors saw the medical implications in terms of diagnosis, right? But in terms of trying to prove an afterlife, it has to do with what I'm saying is that this is a different chapter, but if you've read the chapter on figures of speech, you see that every common language expression for life after death is a figure of speech, and they never end up with a literal equivalent. And so Aristotelian logic, which is, we may not know the term, but everybody knows it because you absorb it, right? But that is predicated on literally meaningful true or false propositions.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that once you realize that nonsense has not just a structure, but a more complicated structure than meaningful language, then you can integrate that into your thought process in a way that will enable you to see, just like Dr. Kaku said. He said, it's the general relativity and quantum theory, that's the highest knowledge we have. But when you combine the equations, it's unintelligible nonsense. That doesn't mean that we abandon it. We hold on to it as a placeholder until we can get. There's some great scientists who've been onto that. The guy who invented fingerprints, Galton.
I thought God invented fingerprints.
Who?
I thought
God, but then Galton brought him to life. He was the person who pointed out the thing about fingerprint detection. But in his thought process, he said, "I don't think in words," and he was constantly fascinated by people who said they thought in words, because he said, sometimes I hear nonsense words. Sometimes I hear nonsense just like like it would be like the notes may accompany a melody or something. But he said, and so to him, see, nonsense was a cognitive process.
And did he used it as a placeholder for arriving at?
Well, he was, because see, it's a placeholder, like he's trying to come up with new ideas that nobody has ever had, but he can't use literal words, so he's putting these nonsense words, more or less like musical notes, he said, in his thought process. And there's a lot of this. If you go back to 1841, there was a very famous German astronomer who said, "What concept do we have of a life that is not terrestrial life. And that's a big one if you think about it. What concept do we have of a life that is not terrestrial life? Well, see, look in terms of placeholders. Well, it's for, that's nonsense for a long period of time. Then in 1960, Frank, whatever his name was, got those people together in West Virginia, and they came up with the equation, right? That how they had several different criteria for how you would detect an extraterrestrial life. And they had, for example, what percentage of stars have planets around them? And
the Drake equation.
The Drake equation.
Yeah.
Frank Drake. And so, see, that's placeholder nonsense. But look what's happened to it in 1960. What knowledge was there in 1960 of what percentage of stars have planets around them? It was, some people said it was practically nil, because that a star formation process would be one star coming close to another and bringing out the gas that would be condensed, right? Mm-hmm. And that would hardly ever happen. But now we know from the web that the number is almost one. But that every star has planets.
Yeah.
Right? So we're filling in, see, and that it was nonsense, but now it's gradually being filled in.
So does it only serve as a placeholder, or does it serve as more?
Well, it can serve as a stimulus for coming up with new ideas too. It's like, it's what I found when I taught philosophy and then psychology. I've taught a lot, and I started teaching my nonsense logic in 1969 at East Carolina University, and I had developed it a little bit in graduate school, but I started teaching it in 1969, and this same scenario has happened dozens of times, maybe hundreds of times, but this is the one that's in my mind because it was the first one, right? Had this lovely young lady who was in my class, and she brought, I remember she pushed her little baby in the stroller every day. She had a baby, and she brought that baby, and who was just excellently, behaved. And so, she went through the first few weeks, and then, and I taught the nonsense logic, and then she came in one day and she said, Dr. Moody, she said, I had the strangest experience. She said, I was flunking chemistry. So I just couldn't make heads or tails of it. She said, but after we did those nonsense exercises, she said, I found the chemistry was easy. And that's happened dozens of times. And what that indicates to me is that learning these principles has a way of opening your mind up to other knowledge that you couldn't master before.
If you didn't go through that. If
yeah.
you didn't employ that.
Yeah, so, and it's happened. So I am absolutely confident that if somebody did a systematic study of that, that's what they'd find. Because it just happened regularly that they would say that learning this suddenly opened up their ability to learn a lot of other things. And by the way, in the courses I taught, the students would learn a pattern, right? They would learn Near English, how that works, and categorical nonsense or all of the different types they would learn, right? And then they would have to do an exercise, right? They would have to write their own sentences of Near English or categorical nonsense or self-contradictions. And then I would ask them, how did that make you feel, right? What was your mental process? I got the most astonishing answers out of that. I mean, a very common way of saying it said, wheels were turning in my mind that I didn't even know had ever been there. In other words, people say that these exercises brought up a whole level of cognitive capacities they didn't know they had. Now go back to Hume. By the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Some new species of logic is required for that purpose, and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to
So if
comprehend
nothing
that
else,
logic.
then the employment of nonsense, meaningless, unintelligible language, expands the mind.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
So what would be the practice, like if I came to you and I said, Raymond, I want to be the guy, I want to be the psychonaut, okay, that creates the parallax, that points to the afterlife. What would be my
am
practice?
actually engaged in a study right now with this. I have, and the reasoning behind this is, I'm going to have 10 physicians, okay, and they're physicians because what I'm looking for is people with the same background knowledge that I have. See, and then I will teach them nonsense logic. Okay, and the conjecture is that when they have the near-death experience, we will use this as an entree that in our own eventual near-death experiences, we're going to use nonsense logic as a way to establish trans-death or after-death communication with the rest of us.
Okay.
So, think about it. Hume said some new species of logic is required for that purpose and some new faculties of the mind. And so the new faculties of the mind are that enable the abilities to recognize different types of nonsense, to characterize their structure, to make their own creative examples of them, to experience all kinds of psychological effects like in glossolalia. So we have that power of our mind. It's just that it's blocked because of the purely psychological reaction to an interjection. Right?
Yeah.
It's crazy, really.
It really is wild.
It is, but it's fact.
So then back to my endeavors, right? If what would be my practice? Like in terms of like a spiritual practice, what would be my spiritual discipline?
Well, you could come up with your own. But one thing you might have, and so many people have done this, is like they find that just creating their own examples of nonsense opens up. But the best way to do it is to do a lot of different types, right?
Okay.
And then to monitor the way you feel and so on.
Okay.
And and another thing about this, I didn't mention this because it's been kind of rare, but some of the cases, I had students who let me give you my main example. I had this wonderful student who was an artist, and every day to class he would bring his big leather zipper case, they call him, and he would show me and he just loved his art. And like we creative people, what can we do? So he ended up having a job at the VA as a bureaucrat. And so about 15 years after he was in my class, he sent me this graphic art he had done. And he said that he made this, how when you see the 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets, and the Old English lettering?
Yeah.
He made a lithograph or whatever it was, the 10 Commandments, like in that form, and then labeled and all. And he said he hung them up in his VA office, and he said over the years he had a lot of comments, and they fell into 2 categories. He said, one is, isn't it illegal to have that kind of religious stuff in a government office? And then other people said, I'm so glad there's a Christian working in the VA. He said, nobody ever bothered to look at it to see that it was just complete nonsense. Like none of it made any sense. So,
Okay.
different people, is my point. Like one guy in North Carolina who was a very successful businessman, was so inspired by my nonsense logic that he made his business cards into nonsense. He had a whole different, and he said there were people who collected them. Like, have you got a new card? So it's like it's an open thing because people can come up with their own.
But the reason for employing it, I'm gathering,
differs among different people.
Okay, so so I'm wrong then. Because I'm thinking, okay, so it's to expand consciousness, and by the expansion of consciousness, you become aware of things that you didn't even know to be aware of.
That's
before.
right, and you become aware of. See, nobody would have guessed that they had the ability to distinguish between infinitely different types of nonsense, and to see their common structure, and to feel their effects, and to differentiate among, this one makes me feel this way, this one makes me feel this way. So see, that is in us. It's just, it remained untapped because of a linguistic superstition.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start to employ different types of nonsense.
At first, just do it in private. And do the exercise, like write different times. Think about how that makes you feel. What kind of, like students would say, I felt wheels in my mind turning that I didn't even know were there.
Yeah, and I can see that, and I can even relate to what that feels like, especially back in my more charismatic days where I employed, speaking in tongues more.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, it's a wonderful practice. I can't say that it made me feel closer to God because I was closer to God. I was close to God anyway, but it was a fascinating spiritual experience.
Yeah, there's something that happens there in your consciousness.
Yeah.
That same thing with music, but that's for another time. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to talk to you about that process.
All right.
And maybe we can talk about this again, because obviously this is a really difficult topic to wrap the average mind around.
Yeah.
But I really want, obviously I would love if there was just a proof.
Yeah. Well, can I say something to the folks listening in directly? Where should I look?
Right there.
All right. Folks, thank y'all so much for listening in, and I know I sound crazy and all, but listen, I've got a book on this now. Swan Song is my new book that's coming out on this, and I urge y'all, if y'all find this, and it has a lot more in it too. There's a story that begins with the story of Greek philosophers and their ways of inquiring into the afterlife. And it has all kinds of exercises in there you can do to bring your mind to new heights. And it results at the end. It really does. If you will read this with me and think it through with me, then we can come closer than anybody else before us ever has to a genuine rational proof of an afterlife. So I ask you to spread the word, if you would, around about Raymond Moody's forthcoming new book, because I'm trying to get a publisher, because, I'm sorry, big publishers think the American people are stupid. And, I'm afraid that they would ruin this. But if I can't get a big publisher, I'm going to put it out on Amazon.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping I can get a publisher. But just spread the word if you're interested in this. And thank y'all so much for listening in.
Yeah. Thank you. Same. Thanks for listening, and I hope that it's interesting, and
I hope y'all got something out of it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that it's hopeful.
Yeah.
Because this is an important part of our humanity. We need to have hope.
And God is real, and God is fun, and He is hilarious. And He is enjoying our stories, just like
I think so.
Like, who was the guy who escaped from Auschwitz who said, God made man because God loves stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he's dead on with that.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for watching, and please comment. I love responding to the comments,
good or
especially
bad,
on these interviews
negative
with
or
Raymond.
positive.
I'll tell you, they're almost all positive. I should sit with you sometime. You don't really do computers, but you should see the comments.
Great.
People love you. And,
well, I love
you.
y'all too. This love is what this is all about.
Yeah.